Hello, everyone. My name's David Robertson. Sorry I can't be there to participate in this colloquium with you. I'm really looking forward to finding out how it goes. There looks like an absolutely fantastic program and a huge amount that I would love to dive into if time zones were a little bit more friendly for us. I'm presenting this short video on behalf of myself and my colleague Annette, who is the Deputy Director of Education at the Monash Sustainable Development Institute, where we work. And we've been collaborating together for about 5 years on the subject that I'm going to be talking about as a case study in this video. I've got a short presentation to step through that contains some content and an overview of the case study. And I'd like to just share my screen now and start as well by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which I'm working, living and preparing this video. In fact, the people of the Boon Wurrung and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations in what's now called Victoria, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So this case study looks at a subject within an overall master's, or we call it a unit here, Monash University in Australia, but it's the equivalent of a subject within a broader program or degree. And so it sits in a context of an interdisciplinary master's, which is run by 3 faculties within Monash University, our faculties of arts, business and economics and science, along with our institute, which is an interdisciplinary non-faculty institute. It's a postgraduate coursework degree with 5 specialisations, of which this sits within a leadership specialisation, which was Australia's first postgraduate leadership offer relating to sustainability. And the unit that we're talking about has quite an explicit practical focus. We want students to think about how they can apply the concepts they learn in the real world, but it does take place entirely within a classroom context. There are other units in the masters where there's experiential opportunities to work with communities, industry partners, and so on. We really wanted to support an action orientation and the confidence to influence change in students. And so we wanted this to be a safe space for them to test ideas and skills and develop themselves. And we have quite a diverse learner cohort, which I'll talk about in a moment. And we think that this challenge is a really wonderful quote that we've come back to quite a few times over the years, that students can sometimes, and this is even sometimes we've observed in other parts of this master's, they can be left without maybe a sense of commitment or their position regarding the meaning, beliefs and action relating to sustainability. So action orientation is a really important part of what we're trying to achieve here. And we also see that we really want to develop their skills to innovate and be creative in both process and outcome. And we think that many students have quite a focus on outcomes, and maybe drawing attention to process is an important part of this unit too. This is quite a complex slide and don't necessarily need to read it all, but essentially we interviewed and did some original industry research to look at what skills and knowledge were desired by those in our ecosystem here within Australia, and hopefully some that were international as well, including in-depth kind of multimedia production with 19 sustainability leaders. We also reviewed ESD's scholarship and as well general kind of academic and practical content about the subject areas that we intended to do, and then collaboratively produced our materials, which cover things like introduction to change processes in society and theories of change, looking at strategic planning systems and stakeholders, and then looking in a more practical way at tactics for advocating towards action for governments, businesses, communities, and managing collaboration and partnerships. And this has shifted a little bit over the years, but that was our original formulation, and we viewed our first year of delivering this unit as a pilot. And there, alongside that, there are a number of assignments where they apply the learnings from those concepts. We have a very, very diverse set of learners. We actually asked students to describe their own disciplinary backgrounds and got 32 unique descriptions from the 43 students taking this subject in 2018. About 20% of the cohort reported a formal background in environmental issues, but 50% said that they prioritized environmental issues in their lens on sustainability over social, economic, or an integrative approach. Very broad nationality and cultural backgrounds, and a good mix of genders. So what do we do? The whole class essentially follows an experiential case study model where they are expected to look at a real world situation and eventually come up with a design of an idea and propose it as a change intervention. We begin in supporting them by doing this. Many students have never gone end to end on a design process. And so we have a full day sort of hackathon innovation challenge in which they do a light touch preview of every major step in that task, where they collaboratively conduct a system mapping exercise, define problems, ideate around those problems, select and prioritize an idea, and then pitch it. And we do that on a problem that is local to them. We use a campus-based sustainability example that they've got lived experience of. And then we throw them into a broader case study that lasts for the remaining 10 weeks of the unit. And we've been using the transport system of our city as a broad example. Students form working groups, undertake divergent analyses of the system, looking at things like the politics and governance of the system, the cultural and behavioural norms within the system, the environmental issues, the economics, and so on. So they diverge in their working groups while looking at subsections of this system, developing quite a rich picture. And we tie that to the systems thinking competence. They then more tightly define what they think are the priority areas for intervention, and that really draws on the values around sustainability, and we explicitly use the Sustainable Development Goals to guide that process. And then they think about a range of options and how they might influence futures in those systems, linking in with anticipatory competence there. They then select ones that they think are the most promising, that both work and fit the contexts in which they're looking. And at this point, they're collaborating very closely in teams. So this kind of initial working group structure coalesces into formal teamwork in these kind of interdisciplinary groups. And then they have to start thinking about ways to hone, refine, iterate, and then eventually pitch and propose their ideas in detail. And so we think that these competencies become more or less salient at different points in the unit, and we make sure that we're drawing attention to them as they arise. We think that it counters some key biases in students by forcing them to adopt different lenses at the outset. Only 20% of them get to look into the transport system from an environmental perspective at the start, even though 50% probably would naturally take that approach. They have to stay with the analysis, the exploration, and the understanding of the system until the halfway point of the unit, whereas many of them want to jump in with solutions right away. Often as well, they simply reproduce solutions that they've seen in everyday life, and we really try and push them to go beyond that in the middle stage of the course to gather many more options and evaluate a range of more innovative approaches. We then put them through the ringer in the second half of the course, making sure that they're not just producing solutions that would work for people like them, the process of institutional mini-meism. So we get them to take perspectives and analyze their ideas with a range of tools. And then we also say that even if your idea maybe has technical merit, there are no idea in a situation where decision makers and politicians are involved, for example, councils and governments, they won't sell themselves. And so we build some practical understanding of decision-making processes and pitching and selling ideas in compelling ways. We also have experiential games that run with the whole class that are about 2 to 3 hour simulations. One of these is in managing the transition of a fictitious energy system, which runs early on in the course, which includes systems thinking concepts and collaboration concepts. And then a later one when they're thinking about how to sell an idea, where we simulate a council budget negotiation process and they play the roles of different actors in that, which we can see in terms of student reflections on these, that they get those core messages towards the outset, that spending more time understanding the situation is important, and that later on forging relationships and making sure that they understand what they can offer others is really important in the process of selling an idea. We see that students say that they are able to use new skills that they've gained to engage with people like policymakers. It teaches them a lot about how they can think even if they didn't think they thought like that, which I think is a really interesting reflection. Does forge a notion of the students as agents of change in their mind, and make them more action-oriented. Obviously, these are cherry-picked reflections, but we think that these kind of themes do come out very regularly. And that's essentially the case study that we're planning to write up into our chapter. In terms of what has worked, what's difficult about this is that sometimes encouraging students to be radical and innovative and propose ideas that are outside of the norm is really tough when you're marking. And they suffer the pressures of the academic environment, and that constrains their creativity and creates anxiety. That's one thing that I think is a real challenge for us as sustainability educators. Think differently, but then submit something that we grade. How do we do that in a way that supports that kind of risk-taking? The cold water of kind of realistic, the cut and thrust of decision-making in government and in the private sector can also be quite a mixed message when you're asking students to propose transformative ideas. Be radical and be practical is really unusual bedfellows. And what we've been attempting to do is use things like architecture-inspired portfolio approaches that document learning, crafting, the gathering of ideas, the refining of techniques, the refining of the idea and iteration into the assessment as a way to understand and make visible process and the mess of this kind of influencing change, rather than placing a lot of weight on some kind of polished proposal, which is historically how we've done it and how we've seen many other kind of courses land. So really trying to make visible the process using this kind of other disciplines approach. And we're also exploring students' own perceptions of what creative habits and innovative influences they bring into the course, how they're developed in the course of the subject, and how they think that'll influence their practice in sustainability more broadly. So I'm really curious to know whether anyone would like to either engage with us or have a conversation around these kind of tensions. Radical and innovative thinking in the context of an assessed piece of coursework, the balance between innovation and practicality in terms of supporting students to come up with ideas, and how to make visible the creativity and innovation within the process, not just the outcome. Hope that the rest of the colloquium is really stimulating for you, and look forward to engaging when it's possible.